We I will welcome you all again on behalf of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation and continue the good work Elisabeth was doing in making death, dying, loss, and grief part of family conversations, part of conversations that we're having every day of our life, and with the understanding that dying is also part of our life. And she lived her life to the fullest. Her son, Ken, continues the good work the foundation has been doing, and there are chapters all over the world. He is currently in Japan and then going to Singapore, where they have a palliative care training program for physicians and nurses that work in East Asia in places that never heard of palliative care, or hospice, places like Nepal and East Timor. So those of you that were able to donate for this, thank you so much. Through your donations, this work continues in Elisabeth's name. And this morning, this is being recorded, and this will be available as soon as Ken Ross can put it up on the YouTube page for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, which is a wealth of information and resources. I'd recommend that you just go and check that out there. And then I'll send you an email once this is available, and any resources that come up today in today's conversation, any resources to get a hold of Luna, or any resources that Luna talks about today will also be in that email. So thank you all. And Luna, I just want to introduce Luna. I met Luna through our writing teacher. We share a mutual writing teacher. Her name is Anne Randolph, and she has a writing class. She's been here several times in the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation talking about writing as a creative means to navigate loss. And I met Luna when she was giving a master class reading from some of her writing that she's done. And I was so moved by both her approach to grief and her writing that I asked her if she'd be willing to come and speak to this morning. So Luna, I'm going to give this over to you. Yes, another unmute. Yes, we have a number of people from Unmute or Anne's folks here.
Yay.
Jamie from Hawaii, Tina in Washington, myself. So my biggest pleasure in life is connecting people through the most bizarre ways possible. And so this is just a fantastic way to come to connect people through death, dying, loss, and grief, how we can navigate these things as part of our lives in a meaningful way, and the power that writing has. I heard yesterday somebody say, I read to escape my life and I write to understand it at the deepest level possible. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way to think about this. So, Luna, please, would you give yourself a longer introduction than that? And let's begin. And I would say that Luna has I have a personal assistant named Alexa, and she's a small little box on my desk. Luna has an assistant named Amy, who's actually there in person helping her with some of the things. So you may see Amy coming in and out of frame today.
Yay.
Thank
Yay
you,
for an
Luna.
amazingly technical wife. Um, so a little bit about me. I've had a writing practice for 30 years. I've authored a couple books, but not books that are related to grief. I've just finished my book called Look, Mom, I Can Fly, about the aftermath of Hunter, my son's death, 4 years ago. And I'm also a visual artist and have a love for just expressing things in ritual and uh, any art form I can find. So I'm going to start with a video that my wife made for us that is one of my poems set to images from the altars that I created on Hunter's grave, and afterwards when it got too nasty outside to do grave altars, I went indoors and started doing mandalas indoors. So we're just going to start there, and then I'm going to just pause for a minute because for me it's really intense. I don't know how it will be for you, but I'm just going to take a moment to just let you settle with that. If you have any reflections that you want to share afterwards, please do. And then I'm going to share with you some creative methodologies for embodying grief and ways that I have really found help me to move grief through my body in a way that is healing and also just allows that transformational process to happen. I very much feel like grief is a process of deconstruction of who you were and who you knew yourself to be. There's a lot of being in the mush of it, the being in the cocoon, and then really starting to discover both, who I am, who you are in a new way, in a new relationship with the world, and what you have to offer. And so that's part of where I am 4 years later, is learning about and starting to explore what I have to offer. So I really am grateful you all are here, and I'm praying this video works. We've been having a few challenges, but we're going to just do our best. So I am going to share my screen. Forgive me for the technical challenges here. All right.
Maybe enlarge that a bit, just so we can
Miss
see
you,
all of it.
want to hug
There
you.
go.
Come as you are, bones and all. Would love to hug you, strong. Me short, you tall. Miss you. Would love to make pad thai with tofu, like I did when you were living. Love to feed you, sit over sushi without the fish, or mac and cheese. Grilled cheese with onions and mustard dipped in tomato soup. Miss you. Would love to hug you after a long day of missing. Or you could send a text, sweet emoji. Bring maps and compass. Our hug is a portal we walk through. Tell me about the universe. Wish you would call me, ask my advice. Don't need skin and bones, not really. I'll know you. And you'll know me by the voice that sang lullabies. Twinkle, twinkle, rockabye, jababa, jababa. I'm grayer now, quieter. I will still try to take you in my arms, but if you insist, I will sit you on my lap. Miss you. Smile broad at the joy of towering over me. Miss your swanky t-shirts in black or blue. They never did measure up, my opinion. If you stop by, I can get you a new one, if only. No, I told you I would always love you. No, I told you I forgive you. Why'd you go and leave me? You always knew I'd be there for you. Wish you would come back so we could talk about life and after. Miss you. Wish you would call, ping my phone, laugh as around the corner, walk into the room. Miss you. Wish you. Miss you.
I'm just going to allow you a couple minutes just to sit with that experience. If you have anything you want to write in the chat, feel free to just share any images or thoughts, feelings that are swirling as you experience that. Just don't want to rush. And Susan, if there's anything coming in the chat you want to share, feel free to share it.
A couple of comments just that it was so moving and powerful and really beautiful. I would like to say, like, I feel like I feel like I know Hunter a little bit now.
Mm.
It opens the door of grief within. Thank you, Tina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. Trying to get myself there. Ah, sorry.
I loved all the touches of time and in your words and images. Yeah, that was very powerful, the way you presented time related to grief.
So I'm going to start by talking about the power that making flower mandalas and altars have had for me as a way to express and sort of move my grief into beauty. And this came out of being so angry at how many flowers I received and how many flowers I received that died. And I was just, one day I was up at the grave and I was just like, dead flowers, dead flowers. I was tearing petals apart. And I ended up making piles of different colored petals. And then I just started to, I'm gonna try to get this slideshow working. I can't figure out why it's not working right. Come on. Ah, sorry. The petals are, and making little piles of things was a way for me to just start to gather and be present in the moment. It was a channeling for me of grief. This is an altar that we made in the community I live in just recently for Hunter's 4th yahrzeit, which is the anniversary of his death. And we gathered things from all over the community, and seed pods and leaves and weeds and everything we could find. The center of this is sunflower seeds and rice. There's lentils. There's, as you can see, there's flowers, but there's also candle holders that we made, and just the idea that how I do this is I just bring a lot of resources with me and allow it to sort of start from the center and move out and not have a plan. I don't really ever go at it with a plan, but it's just a way of letting it evolve with some kind of symmetry. But that's not even necessary. Symmetry is not important as much as it is to just bring yourself to it. And this process for me is also really fascinating in that day after day, as these mandalas, they also, the petals change, they dry out, they change, and the whole spatial arrangement internally to it will start to shift because the leaves have changed or the petals have shrunk. And that too, I find beauty in that. This particular practice has been life-changing for me and really has helped me to both process my own grief and also to bring other people into it. So this was done as a community ritual. And the quadrant on the left is the quadrant that we crafted for Hunter, and then we invited the community to bring their own pictures of their loved ones, and they filled up the spaces and added their own flowers from the remaining pieces that we had of baskets of different types of natural materials, and everybody got to participate. We also included, you can see around the edges of this mandala that there are little crystals, and that was our giveaway at the end of this ceremony, was we gave everyone who came. I call this crystal a soul catcher. I don't know exactly what it's called, but in my mind, it's a soul catcher. And this has been a gift that we've given people at the anniversary of Hunter's death for several years. And so the idea is that they can take it and hang it somewhere, and then it continues to bring light and rainbows to their lives. And so that felt really important to me. This is what it looked like once everybody started adding their own pictures and images. And what we did after that was everybody who wanted to shared a little story about the person that they represented on the altar. So in the beginning, my altars were all very much, or my mandalas were all very much just for me. I didn't share them. I didn't do them in groups. I was very much in a private grieving experience. And then as I moved through the grief, I found spaces and ways to include other people in the process. The other piece about doing a flower mandala is how to take it apart. One of the things we do is we gather all the pieces so that there's nothing left behind. There's nothing in the space remaining, not a single petal, not a single seed. And then we go to a river and cast those petals and seeds and rocks down the river as a final releasing and blessing. That has become very much a part of the process. And I'm going to see if this little video works. It's so sweet. Yeah. So when everybody participates in that, it also continues the ritual and makes it a really beautiful continuation of the way we can create beauty and also let beauty go and let beauty be created down the river, so to speak. The next practice that's been super important to me has been my writing practice. And as I said, I have writing every day, just journaling mostly for 30 years. It's just a part of it feels like a part of my cells at this point. It was certainly extraordinarily grounding after Hunter died. I wrote every day. I never missed a day. It was sort of what held my feet tethered to the earth. But one of the things that I also do is aside from just writing kind of freehand what's coming up, is I also use a template. And I just wanted to share that because I feel like it's a very grounding, it's an anchor to a grief process. So I use an app called it's called Day One. It'll be in your resource page when that we send out afterwards. Day One is a beautiful app for journaling because it's very compatible for multiple. You can have multiple journals. You can do templates that you fill out every day. You can also add pictures and videos and audios, and uh, I just find the flexibility of it to be quite lovely. This is an example, though. This is exactly my template. I didn't take anything out of it. I just thought I'd show it to you just the way I use it. And I wanted to explain a couple things. So 5 words is I give myself this challenge of describing how I feel in this very moment in 5 words. Sometimes those 5 words are 5 disparate words: depressed, tired, hungry, that type of thing. And other times it's a 5 word sentence. I notice sometimes I want to cheat and I want to try to make it 6 or 7 words, and I'm like, no, just make it 5 words. Like that's the challenge. And there's a there's a real benefit to containment in a grief process or in any kind of deep emotional process. So the containment of 5 words, the containment of a template, the containment of a time frame in a writing practice is super important and helps it feels like it instructs the nervous system that it's safe and that it's not going to go on forever and ever. And that kind of piece is really important. So I always do 5 words. I track what I eat just because I find it's like a memory practice. And on many days I'm like, I have no idea what I ate the day before. But it is just sort of a practice that way. I also, personally, I track cannabis and alcohol, not because I use it a lot, because I also want to see sometimes, like, does that impact how I'm sleeping or how I'm feeling the next day? Or like I can go back and check, like, is this something that's becoming something I'm using a little too much or whatever. The challenges and celebrations, it's really, even in the very depths of grief, I always tried to find something. I still try to find something I'm celebrating. It's certainly not hard to name challenges in the middle of a grief process, but to name celebrations can be challenging. But to a celebration could be I got out of bed. I took a shower. Um, I picked up the phone and called a friend and asked to go for a walk. To me, those are celebrations, and that's what I mean by a celebration. I'm not going for, huge accomplishments. That's not what I'm looking for in myself. I'm looking for what feels like a win today. And typically I'm writing at 5 in the morning. That's just my practice. So I'm looking back on the day before typically. But whenever you write, it's just using your day to acknowledge that there are things that are challenging every day and there are things that are celebrations every day. I track dreams. I actually don't have a ton of dreams happening these days, but when I do, I like to have a place for it in my template. I like to remind myself. I track what I read and what kind of music I'm listening to or what kind of movies I'm watching. Again, I find that really interesting going back. For example, I went back to my templates before Hunter died and looked at the fact that I had been reading books that were about parents that had lost children. Kind of an interesting thing. And it was like, oh, what the heck? Why was I reading those things? It's like some part of me was preparing. I track exercise as an accountability practice to keep myself moving. I track the number of steps I take, or if I go to yoga, it just feels good. For me, I track giving and receiving because it's really easy to talk yourself into the fact that you're not doing anything for anybody else when you're grieving. And by doing this practice, so giving could be spending an hour listening to a friend on the phone. It could be sending my niece $100. It could be making a meal for somebody, but it's a way of just really looking at like, oh yeah, I am still functioning in some form, or I may not be for that week, but it just reminds me that, oh, is there something little that wouldn't feel too hard to do that could help me feel like there's some generosity happening? I'm always naming gratitude. And again, the simplest, most basic things are the things that I try to name. I'm grateful for what it feels like to walk on the grass, or to hear bird song, or to hear the crickets at night. Again, it's a mindfulness practice to do gratitudes, and it helps to just center you in the experience of right now. And a lot of grief, a lot of the suffering of grief, in my experience, is the um, what's the word for it? Ruminating and future tripping. If I'm right here in the moment, I had this moment that I had been just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, like so hard, and my face hurt. I had been crying so hard. And all of a sudden, it's like, it just like the storm passed, and I just sat there and I was like, huh. I mean, this was literally like 2 weeks after Hunter died. And I thought, huh, I'm not hurting. I feel just kind of okay. And it was just this funny reality of like, it doesn't hurt every minute, even though we will tell ourselves it hurts every minute. But the truth of the matter is, it typically doesn't hurt every minute. It hurts intensely, and it comes in waves. And if we have ways to let things through us, it tends to move instead of get stuck. And the stuckness tends to be where the suffering comes from, in my experience. I track health, and I give health a number. So health is I rank how I feel about my health from 1 to 10, and then I make any notes of anything that's happening, that I want to just keep track of.
I'm
It's
sorry,
just,
what?
again, it's
All
a
these
helpful
things just
thing. Why Hunter's on there is because I'll track signs or conversations, or I'll just say something to him. I'll just be like, I really miss you. Um, Thanks for helping me write that poem today, whatever it is. And then I track how much time I meditate in a day and how my sleep is. My sleep is also something that I rank 1 to 10 as a way to just, again, track whether things that I'm doing, exercise, journaling, what my health feels like, what my is impacting my sleep, how I eat. So I'm tracking that to kind of just, again, keep me present to like what's happening in this body in this moment right here. It's a somatic practice for me to name these things. The second piece of the writing practice that I want to share, and there is a handout you'll get at the end of this presentation, so you don't have to write all this down, by the way. I should have told you that earlier. Is to consider doing a writing practice where you write for 5 to 10 minutes with a timer and a writing prompt. A writing prompt could be something like, I remember, or I did not get to, or I want to linger on. And you just answer the question for 5 minutes. You put a timer on, you just write. If you run out of a thought, you write it again, you write it again. The idea is not to create a beautiful essay or anything. The idea is just to get things out of you, to just start to get them moving. And I would say one of the keys to the writing, to a writing practice, is to don't stop your pen or your keyboard. Try to turn the editor inside your head off, or give them a task, like say, hey, go outside, editor, I need you to go, take the dog for a walk while I write. It's jokes, but it does work sometimes to just kind of tell them, like, please take a hike. I'm going to write, and I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to write. I just need to get it out of me. And it can be very powerful and valuable to share your writing with someone who feels really safe, who's not going to judge it, who's not going to advise you about it, but just can be a witness and say thank you at the end of it. Like, you read to them and they say thank you. That is a beautiful way to start to broaden, and share the experience of grief. Because so much of the time it's so internal, and nobody has any idea what we're feeling unless we actually share it. And when we start to share it, there's more of a connection, and it's easier for people to know how to be there for us. And that I have definitely found to be true. So I highly recommend it, and I recommend that it's a really safe person. Um, Susan named the class where we met, which is the Unmute Yourself writing class. And I would call it more of a writing practice. It's not so much a class where you're being taught about writing so much as it's a place to write your heart and have witnesses that who are kind and compassionate and not giving you anything other than affirmation for getting out there and being on the page. So highly recommend it in case that's something that would be, I find the structure of it really helpful. I also find that when I'm given prompts, I can write into places that I wasn't expecting to go. And that will help me in my grief journey a lot. So that's writing practice. The next thing that really, really helps is to move. Really, like 5 minutes, turn on a favorite piece of music, and even if all you can do is shake your hand, I had times where all I could do is lay on the ground and just go like this, just shaking my hand. Whatever it is that you need to be able to just trusting yourself, but moving your body will really help move grief through your body. And there are times when I would start to shake and I would just be sobbing the next minute. And that felt really good because it just felt like it was just trying to move it from where it was feeling stuck or kind of, I would say sometimes my emotions have felt kind of constipated, and then you just kind of get it moving. In the handout that I'm giving you, I've got some ideas for music that might work. I really recommend making your own playlists. There's also some great on both Spotify and Insight Timer. There are grief-related yoga practices and movement practices. So you can look for that on Spotify. There's several group grief songs, that lists of songs that have moving songs that are really good for shaking your body up. So I recommend that if you haven't considered that idea. So the next thing that really has made a difference for me, and I want to say that everything for me has been in cycles. I made mandalas for 3 or 4 months, and then I kind of stopped making mandalas, and then I would start coloring, and then that would stop, and then I would dialogue with Hunter, and then that would stop, and it would just be it kind of just flows into other things. But the key that I would say when it comes to doing this kind of expressive coloring is use materials that don't feel precious. So thick crayons, thick pastels, and I say thick because they help your child self feel safer. They don't break. You can get really pissed off, and yeah, and they hold together. A lot of times when I am doing this type of practice, I will simply just start making a mark. And then sometimes my body just wants to make that mark over and over and over and over again, wherever it is on the page. And you can notice here, I was just doing this in a journal with lined paper. Again, don't go for the fancy paper and the fancy stuff because that can make you feel like, I'm making art. I'm not recommending that we're making art. I'm recommending that we're just making marks that help us to move emotion. Sometimes words come into it. This says being with everything everywhere all at once. I think I had just watched the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once or something, but again, just letting it flow is super helpful. This is all no. I just wrote no like 400 times. And that was super, super cathartic. Just what word is it that what do you want to say? Do you want to say yes? Do you want to say no? Do you want to say stop? Whatever. Or being angry. I think there's so much, for me, there's been a lot of anger as part of my grief process. And I think so many people, however your person dies, to recognize that anger is a normal part of the experience. We're just mad they're gone. Even if they died at 110, we're still mad they're gone. And letting yourself have that emotion is super important. Sometimes the marks are just hard and fast and just, again, like making a mess, by whatever definition you have of mess, is just super important and fine. So I also don't recommend sharing these drawings. Whereas to me, writing can be really helpful to share. I have found that it's really helpful to not share your drawings because it activates our inner terrified child artist self, which most I've taught art, and I can tell you that I would say 80 to 90% of the people that I've ever worked with or taught have this have been shut down in their artist self when they were little. And so to just honor that and at least not share it for a while. If at some point you want to say, hey, friend, I really trust you, I'd like to show you this series of drawings I've done, I think that that could be possible and supportive, but perhaps you wait a while so that there's no sense of you're looking for somebody's acknowledgement, or that they feel like they have to say, oh, that's really nice. You know, like it's not really nice. It's just freaking expressive. And anything that can smack of inauthenticity can feel really crappy to the one who was expressing it. So that's just my own experience. And I'm just trying to give you some examples of what that looks like for me. And it'll look different for you. It depends on the materials you use. Again, using words. I love using words when they come through. They don't always come through, but so this is for me, a really helpful practice. And even just saying to myself, okay, I'm just going to scribble every day for 5 minutes. The other thing I want to say about this practice is that if you tend to be a person who has a very emotive process, using a smaller piece of paper will be helpful to you. It's more contained. It's not going to let you feel so, if you're already feeling a bit overwhelmed by your emotional self and expression, then smaller paper is better. So, for example, when I was going through a very painful divorce, I gave myself 4 by 6 inch pieces of paper, and every day I just had to do an image on that card every day I did for an entire year. And that containment gave me so much safety. If you're a person that doesn't feel very easily and it's hard for you to access what's happening inside of you, bigger is better. More physical movement is better. Really letting yourself go, putting up a big piece of paper on the wall and just making marks in color will help you to feel. So just take note of that if that's helpful. So this next piece is about how to really talk with your loved one. The book that I'm about to publish is a series of conversations where I started writing to Hunter, and just write, just letter after letter after letter. And then it suddenly dawned on me that he could write back. And I just started giving him the pen, so to speak, or the keyboard. And I would ask him a question, and then I would just like let whatever comes through come through. And it was really amazing. Like I would start to not only hear his voice, and even the way he would sign off every time, it was always like, "Gotta go, mom." It was funny. It made me laugh each time. You're like, "Gotta go." Like, what are you in a rush for, dude? Like, but he would be like, "I gotta go. I'm in school. Like, I've got things I gotta go do, and I'm glad to be here with you, but my time's up." And the other thing that's really it's just really powerful to see the evolution of that being coming through you. So when I go back and read, I'm actually in the process right now of recording the audiobook of my book called Look, Mom, I Can Fly. And I can feel it. I can feel how he has matured, as like he was maturing along the journey as days went on, as I was processing my grief, his messages to me, I could feel him quieting down and getting more grounded in his own knowingness coming through me. And it just really started to feel like a maturing, a maturing soul, I guess is the best way to put it. So I find this to be super helpful. And the one note I'd have here is also pretty much the same, is don't look at it for 24 hours. Don't reread it. Give it some space. And that's really to keep our editor, our critic at bay. It's so easy to say, well, it's not really them. How do I know it's them? It doesn't really matter. I'll just say that. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're accessing a part of you or a channel that is giving you some really helpful information. And if you can wait 24 hours and reread it, often you'll be like, wow, that's pretty wise. Where did that come from? I mean, I will reread things and I'm just like, really? Like, yeah, I wouldn't have known. So this is a practice I highly recommend. Um, it is a practice. So if you give yourself some time to just settle down and be quiet and then I do it like bullet points, like me, and I ask a question and then I write his name and then I write what his answer is. And then if I have a question or a comment, then I write my name again. So it's a kind of a clear dialogue for me. That's kind of the way it works. Other people probably do it a different way, but that's what works for me. So I want to really open this up for questions and conversation. Susan might have some other questions for me. I do just want to share that you're welcome to visit my website, and there is a sign up there if you want to get notifications about when my books are out. And then I just want to say, hands down, the most amazing, powerful, transformative experience I've ever had is with Grief Pilgrim. The website is Siobhan Asgarzadeh, and she is the most incredible grief doula and ritualist that I've ever encountered, and I highly recommend considering working with her online or in grief retreats, because her whole process is about really being present with nature and letting grief be the teacher that it is. And so I feel like so much of what who I am today is because of her and how I have learned to sit with grief. So I just want to give her a shout out. And I also want to give a shout out to my wife, who did the amazing job on the video. So yeah, I'd just like to open it up, and I guess I should stop sharing to do that. Da-da-da. There we go.
Thank you so much, Luna. I do have a couple of questions, and I know some people have asked questions in the chat here. Let me go back to see them. But I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit. The poem, the video poem was beautiful, but could you tell us a little bit about Hunter and sort of your circumstances that led you to this grief?
Yeah, so Hunter, he was one of those kiddos that I have to turn off. Hold on. Sorry, I don't like looking at myself. There we go. Hunter died of an accidental overdose of codeine-based cough syrup, and he was struggling with a lot of anxiety and really thought that he really felt that his anxiety was being helped by cannabis. I really felt like it was not. And that was just his way of managing. So he went from being this incredibly joyous, easy child to a teenager who started to really be eaten up by anxiety. And he felt like cannabis was sort of the way to cope with the world. And then that created, in my opinion, that created a lot of physical challenges, because cannabis does create a lot of gut issues for people. And so the cough syrup was something that an urgent care provider gave him way too much of, and he miscalculated. So it was very sudden. I never had any fear that he was going to die. It wasn't like there were multiple experiences of him getting too close to or overdosing, or he was never suicidal. None of those things were the case for him. Yeah.
Thank you. Those any kind of death, I think of a child as particularly like the amount of grief that is left in the wake of the death of a child, no matter the circumstances, but particularly when it's completely unexpected. And yeah, thank you so much, Luna, for sharing that. There are some questions that people have up when you were talking about the different practices. The list that you had up there, was that all from Day One app?
So that's a template that I made. So Day One, yeah, Day One, and I put it in the handout, I believe. Oh, you know what? I think I forgot to put that. I said I would, and then I spaced it. I will send it to you soon.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. I'll send it to you. But day one has templates that are already made that are real simple. Like, I don't know, I can't remember because I've never used them, but you can add a custom template.
Okay, that would be
Yep.
great. So for everybody here, just to know that Luna's put together a handout that I won't be able to send through Eventbrite, but I'll have your email addresses. So I will send it from my personal email address, which is samb_40@yahoo.com. So if you get something from that address that says Luna Jaffe, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, please open it because that will be a really great set of resources for you.
Great.
A couple of questions about, I loved when you were talking about, a couple of things I just want to say listening to you, and what really struck me when I heard you in the unmute reading is that I feel like for so many people, the experience of grief, particularly the experience of grief around a child or just a very sudden death that's completely unexpected, there's a sensation of literally being swept away, like by a tidal wave of emotion. And what what I hear from you is that happens, and also there's a recognition on your part that you had choice points throughout that experience that you chose to continue a practice like journaling, that was like you chose to do that. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that feeling of being just swept away, overwhelmed by emotion, and also recognizing choice points along the way. Like you didn't just sort of throw out your creativity, like you kind of, it seems, use that as an anchor. And for so many people, I feel like those feelings of that I have a choice about anything that's happening to me just doesn't seem to be what they're pointing to. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about that and how that unfolded for you.
Yeah, I think well, one, I will say that my mom was diagnosed with ALS in 2016. And my mom was the one who introduced me to so many of the resources that I've come to know around grief. Actually, both of my parents. My dad died suddenly, so I've experienced the sudden death of my father when he was 61, I was 31, so that was 30 years ago. And well, more than 30 years ago. And I didn't know anything about grieving at that time. I was very lost. And so fast forward, but my dad was really involved with hospice work and things that were important to him. So there was, both of my parents were informing me in sort of a modeling rather than teaching mode. But on my mom was very much reading Frances Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which has been an incredible guidepost for me, and Die Wise, and uh, Being Mortal, and what else? Joan Halifax's book, which totally escapes me the name of it. But there were just ways in which I feel like that experience of sort of being with the anticipatory grief of someone with ALS did give me a fertile ground, so to speak, for learning how to just honor and be with grief instead of pushing it away. And I feel like most of what I see in people I've worked with, or in some of the retreats I've tried to attend that have been so irritating, so many places where I'm just like, oh my God. And part of it's because there feels like there's a disconnection between what's happening in the body and really honoring the somatic experience of grief, and trusting that we can navigate going into that space rather than dissociating from it. So much of the time it feels like in this culture we're taught, like, when are you going to get over it? When are you going to stop talking about, like, we just want you to move on because we're freaking uncomfortable. And I just wasn't going to go there. I was like, I'm leaning into this, and the more I leaned into it, the less scary it was. I've said multiple times throughout the journey, throughout these 4 years, that I'm much more comfortable in the darkness than I am in the light of day. And so, because it's hard for this culture to have places to talk about your loved ones. They don't want to say like, people don't want to say Hunter's name unless they're other moms who have lost children, or very dear friends who totally get it, which, they're few and far between. So there's a lot to be said for the comfort, really. We think the darkness is scary and horrifying, but I think it's so comforting. And That image that I had in a slide earlier of being curled up in the roots of the tree, it was like I painted that. I just remember feeling like I am that seed curled up at the base of a tree, just learning to be in that fallow place and not expect things of myself, to let it be okay to curl up in a ball and honor what my body needs, that there's a lot of need for rest. There's a lot of need for just listening to soulful music that makes you weep. There's just things like that. And honoring that is the best thing I could do. Now, I will also just say I was fortunate that I was self-employed and I was able to navigate my schedule in a way that not everybody can do. And I totally get that. And I think that's a super hard piece when you have to, in some ways, like losing your only child it's the most horrific thing ever. But I also see how hard it is for people who lose a child and have three more they have to take care of.
Yeah.
And so then they're like, I have to help you three grieve. I have to grieve, and I don't know how to do that. And yeah, I have so much compassion for how hard that is because I didn't have to do that. I was able to just fully be in my own process.
That's
So I think we all have our way, right?
No, and I think that, just pointing to that we all have our way, and that it's unfortunate that grief is the time where we really, for some of us, we really allow ourselves just to stop, like the sort of the treadmill, the hamster wheel that we're all running on all the time to try to get everything right and get everything done and multitask and do all these things. Grief kind of blows that out of the water, and that gives us an opportunity to really just focus on what is the most important thing here right now? What is the one thing I could do right this minute? And having some, facility, some kind of control of your time is a huge thing, that you don't have to go back to work after your 3 days of bereavement leave for the death of your child or your spouse of
Right.
50 years or
Ugh.
any of those other ridiculous kinds of constraints we put on grief. But the other thing that I heard you talking about is saying the name of the person who's died. And I'll never forget, my father died, and when we called our family members to tell them, my cousin, who my dad was sort of like a better dad to her actually than he was to his 5 kids, she was just out of her mind because she had sent a box for my father of his favorite soups. Um,
Mm,
and she's like, oh my God, you have to get that out of the mail. I can't let Aunt Joan, like my mother, see that. I can't. And I went back to our family room where everybody was sitting, and I just said, oh, Lori just, said this. She's very concerned that you might see this box of soup. And she said, is everybody going to be like that? Is everybody going to think that it's like as soon as he's dead, that I'm not going to think about him as long as we don't say his name? I'll just be fine and like continue my life. Like that's not how that works. And for my mother who was just not open to any of the crazy ideas her many children had who had gone to death and dying workshops. And, she was so clear about that. Like, that's the only thing that's going to keep me going is that people remember, he was my husband and he was your
right.
father. And so I think pointing to that and just being able to say that is, it's important. Like we had this in our family earlier. When my grandmother died, we never talked about her again. And apparently that was what was supposed to take care of everybody's grief, is if we just didn't mention it again. But
Right, right. It's as though
work
it
like
didn't happen. No.
no. So I'm going to go through some. I loved also when you were talking about your writing, and thank you. You shared some of it. It's so beautiful, the writing that Luna and Hunter did post his being in his physical body. Um, I have had a many years relationship with a young being of my own that was gone early, and that went on for about 25 years. And it's
Mm.
just, I would tell my friends and they'd just be like, you've lived in California too long. They just thought that was crazy. But I think that that is a true story for many people who experience a death of somebody very close, where they can still, like Stephen Levine would always tell us, it's never too late to say anything, to make an
Mhm.
apology, to ask forgiveness. It's never too late to say anything to somebody who has died. If you can find a quiet spot, and even you can sometimes remember their voice, but even if you can't, you can ask them, you can have that conversation. And for you to be able to have that conversation and then to be able to wait for the response, I just love that. Somebody asked, does it have to be handwriting when talking to him? Do you think typing could work too?
I type. I
Yep.
type.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say that automatic writing is, this kind of could be called automatic writing. Yeah, it works better with handwriting. I just found that it works beautifully with typing, and I tend to type a lot faster, so I can just pull in the things that are coming without, I tend to edit less when I'm typing. Or I get the critic kind of can go away. So because it's just little, and I also turn the lights off. I can also type without the lights on, and so that also helps me to stay focused.
Mm. Um, did you say neurographica or neurographica? Somebody was pointing out neurographica, which I'm not sure what that is.
I don't know
Google,
what it is
somebody
either.
said to Google it. Yeah, anyway, we'll skip that. And grief doula that you spoke about, I believe that is the link to
That's
www.griefpilgrim.com.
right. That's
So
Siobhan.
that will
Yeah.
be one of the resources that I include, and her name. Thank you, Tish, for posting her name. Siobhan is up there. And somebody asked, did you use a computer or handwrite? And somebody other saying they're so deeply sorry for your loss. Um, it's wonderful to love somebody, but so difficult to say goodbye. Yeah.
Yeah. I've written my share of rants too, I have to say. Like even
Mhm.
early on, it's very interesting to be recording my book right now and to be reading these things that I wrote. Literally, like a week after he died, I was just like
Right.
ranting about dead flowers and I'm sorry for your loss and he's in a better place, all that stuff. And you're
All the
just like,
things.
oh my God, I just can't navigate these things, these platitudes or these things that we just do unconsciously as part of our culture.
Yes.
My encouragement to all of us, and I mean, it's hard for me. It's not like I'm no angel about this stuff. I also feel very tongue-tied when I find out that somebody lost an important person. Um, and I just feel like even the other one is happy birthday, to say happy birthday to someone who lost their child. It's like, you know, I don't want to be happy on my birthday this year. Are you kidding me?
Mhm.
Like, so my friend said, "Have a birthday, Luna. Just have a birthday." I was like, "Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Yes.
I can have it any way you want to have it."
Mhm.
It's like I
Yeah.
loved that. I mean, that to me felt like permission. What if I just want to have a sad birthday or like who said happy was the goal? Merry
Right.
Christmas, all the things we say to someone who's just lost a person,
Hmm.
that stuff's painful.
Very hard. We had a
Whenever we
woman.
can take a minute to just say something a little more personal. I'm
Yeah.
sorry you have to navigate Christmas without your beloved husband.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that you have to have a birthday without your son there with you,
Hmm.
without Hunter there with you. Like the name, say the name. Those are the things that to me feel so powerful.
Or even to ask, do you have any plans for this holiday? Because so often people are just dropped off the face of the earth once they've had a death like that, because of the fear of having a grieving person at the celebratory holiday where everybody themselves is just miserable anyway, being at the celebratory holiday.
There's
That's
some
an
assumption there.
exaggeration, but
Exactly.
yes. But yeah, I think just inviting people to things and giving them the opportunity to say, yeah, that's not going to work for me, or thank you for thinking of me. That's the only invitation I've gotten this year. I think that can be very powerful too.
Yeah, I
Um,
also had an experience that was, it was, when Hunter died was August of 2020, middle of COVID, horrible times being in, Zoom. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was be on any kind of Zoom call with anybody, other than a one-on-one or a grief pilgrimage. But other than that, I was like, and at one point we had a Thanksgiving Zoom call with my family, and it was horrible because I get on and everybody's just chit-chatting about life and like, well, did you hear about this? And I realized that really what could have made that such a different experience is just to have one family member reach out and say, Luna, are you willing to come on the call? And if you are, what do you need? How can we make sure that we include you? How can we talk about Hunter? What would be useful? And can I be your buddy? And can I check in with you after the call? Like those are the things that they seem so simple, but they are so meaningful because then you feel considered. And if somebody brings up, if they say, we're going to start this Thanksgiving call and we want to name that Hunter's not with us and how hard that is for all of us, but in particular, how hard it is for Luna,
yeah.
can we just all light a candle and just sit in silence for a couple minutes before we
Yes.
move on? Like that kind of thing. It's like interesting. My jaw hurts as I'm saying that. So it's like, okay. it's still painful.
It's
It's
still
still painful
painful.
in me, it's still in my body a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's lots of ways we can help each other be better at grief literacy.
we had somebody last year, Dana Amoroso, who wrote a book called Condolences, um, because she had a death of a husband of many, many years and experienced these same sort of things that people are just sort of rotely saying to bereaved people, and wrote a short little book like about that big and this big, just about maybe other ways of thinking about incorporating somebody's grief in a more meaningful way.
Hmm.
People, a lot of people wrote about that. We have Quilly's hand is up, so I'm going to do that. But I just want to first, there's a couple of other things that people have said here. One is that it's so good to hear you speak about your desire to run away from grief because it's too big, but the need instead to move towards it and to lean into it, um, and to become more familiar with it.
Yeah, I've had lots of dialogues with grief too. So I'll just say, hey, grief, what do you got to tell me today? What should
Mhm.
I know? How can I sit with you? Um, and I've written some pieces where she ends up just being this kind of mothering figure who's so much more comforting than I could have ever thought she was. She's not the witch, who's trying to ruin my life. She's actually the comforter and the one who brings medicine to me and helps me heal. So again, it's like opening up to what the gifts are and not pushing them away and acting like they don't matter.
Yeah, somebody suggesting that what do you need is such helpful, such a helpful way to interact with somebody. Thank you, Lois. Lois is also from Unmute, and we're going to have her
Oh,
here in
great.
a couple of months. A couple of things back before I go to the questions, only because Quilly, then I'll forget that they're all here. So I see your hand up here. Um, let's see. People are thanking you for the different modalities that you've used to navigate the grief process. They're looking forward to your book being published. Also, Jamie points out that writing for people with chronic illness that or with trauma, writing to your former self, just acknowledging that kind of grief. Somebody's asking if you've received transmissions in Tibetan Buddhism.
Into what?
If you've received transmissions in Tibetan Buddhism.
No.
No. Um, and somebody's asking what made the retreat so awful, just the oh my God factor, or the just kind of, I think that's something people tend to do is that they figure, being with other people, or I'm going to go on this grief retreat, and then they're just like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be at all.
Yeah, I have experienced online retreats where the facilitator just wants to tell you what grief is. And I don't need anybody to tell me what grief is. I'm actually in it quite deeply. I need someone who can hold space for all that is emerging out of me and out of the women or beings that are on that call or in that retreat. Yeah, there's a tendency in some of these practitioners who do to want to teach you about grief or give you the whole psychoeducational thing, but it's not the right time when you're in the midst of it. And maybe it's appropriate if you want to become a grief facilitator, but it's not really what an individual needs when they're just, sobbing uncontrollably half the day and feeling like nobody gets it except, if anybody, except your dog. It's the only person that gets it. So it's like, how do you create more companionship and witnessing that is not about listening to anybody's advice? It's just about like really what I needed more than anything. I just needed to be heard. I needed a space where it was okay to to just be held in a space, even if I needed to be silent. Um, and that was powerful to just be like, oh, it's okay to be silent. It's okay to wail and just be witnessed wailing. It's okay to share what I'm feeling, as messy and disturbing as it can be. I don't need anybody to give me like all their wisdom in, half an hour.
Yes.
I just don't. I see some heads shaking. Thank you,
Yes.
Tina. I see
There's
you.
somebody's just posting helping parents heal as a website that might be helpful. I don't know if you've ever seen that or heard that.
Yeah, that's another thing that is very interesting. Like, so for me, I attended a couple helping parents heal gatherings. And what I found was that people kept repeating themselves. So it's like they tell their stories and they tell their stories and they tell their stories, and nothing about it felt like it was moving in that there was no evolution to the grieving process. And that became a place of like, no, that's too stagnant for me. I actually don't want to be my story. I want to emerge from something that's being birthed out of this trauma and tragedy. Um, it's not like I want to get over it. That's not it at all. It's just I want to be with all the ways in which it's emerging and be welcomed in that. And when I go to those things, it just feels like people just repeat themselves. And then because new people are coming in all the time, it's over and over again. So yeah, I haven't found them to be that helpful, sadly.
I'm going to bring Quilly down here. Quilly, you had a question. You just need to unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Actually, I wanted to comment, and I raised my hand in the moment that I did was because you were talking about all the inappropriate things that people say. And I think what helped me the most through that was really realizing that they meant well. They weren't crossing the street like some people.
Mm.
No, and they just didn't know. And there's still times where I don't know what to say, and I just wanted to say that. And I think so. My son died in 1993, so I'm way further along on the journey, and I've really it's interesting. I can remember my 4th anniversary, and it's really what I've really appreciated about this presentation, and you're one of the few people that I've ever encountered like this, is that you wanted to go in, and it's kind of like, oh shit, this is my path. And that's I wrote that in my journal. That and then proceeded to go in every nook and cranny I could find. And I think that's what saves us, because I went to Compassionate Friends, which sounds like similar to what you did. And I appreciated it for some things, but I saw the same thing, and people don't make it back to a happy life through not paying attention. And that's practically the only advice I give in an informal way is don't keep busy.
Exactly.
That's deadly. It's deadly. So I've really, really appreciated being with you today, Luna, and I'm sorry for your loss. And on the other hand, I think it's among the bravest of us that get to be on this journey. As you know, I remember a moment reading Stephen Levine say, and it was the first time I had gotten an idea that, okay, maybe this is, I can do this. And I'm not even saying what he said was true, but just that it is possible. And it is possible. The onion is finally done. There is a moment when the onion is all done.
Thank you so much.
Quilly. Deborah, while you were speaking, Quilly, posted, I named all those things that people said to me after the death of my son, stupid shit people say. I would like to read that book, Deborah, when you get around to publishing that.
Stupid shit people say. Yeah, there's lots of it.
There's lots of, it'll be a very large book. I'm just very curious, and that's not to, demean people like their best intentions, but I think really we are in such a sort of grief languaging deficit in this country, like, because everything has to be happy and shiny and positive all the time. It's exhausting for people. So somebody also posted up here a couple of like sort of similar type questions. What if I don't know the answer or the end? How do you grieve if you don't know the part of yourself will return to you? That's one question. And sort of similarly aligned, how do I move into the pain when I'm so scared that I won't ever emerge on the other side? I'm
Yeah, I
curious.
think that's a really common experience, that feeling of if I really let this out, it will consume me and I will never recover or never see the light of day. And my experience is that it's just not true. That's all I can tell you. I can tell you that I've been in very, very intense grief retreats, and both as a participant and as an assistant, and people go so deeply into things and they always return. They always return. It's almost like our own capacity. I think, I would imagine most of you have experienced, you cannot cry endlessly. It just doesn't work. Our bodies just stop and say, okay, I'm out of tears for a while. I need to rehydrate. And so I would encourage in that experience of like, oh, I'm afraid to go there, is right to that part. Talk to that part and just say, I'm really afraid. What can you do to help me not be so afraid? I'd like to actually befriend you. I'd like to come with you. Show me a path. And honestly, there's one of the things I love about the way Siobhan works with grieving people in general is she does a lot of storytelling. And those myths of the dark descent of Inanna or Persephone, that she's told the story of the handless maiden. These stories are so, so helpful because they all are about an ordeal and a descent and a reemergence. And that is the journey. That is the initiatory journey of grief. So when we ally ourselves with people and myths and stories that speak of that as a mythical journey that requires community. I think one of the things that's such a devastating myth is that we can grieve alone. And while yes, we all do our grief alone in our own spaces, we need people. Um, we need people to grieve with, to be companioned by, to be witnessed. And that is what will bring us out of that deepest descent. Truly.
I would agree with that 100%. Yes.
And it's just finding the right people. And I will just say, it's easy to find the wrong people. And I've lost many friends in this process. There's just my bullshit meter is like, it's on, baby. I'm not taking it. If you don't want to step in with me in this place where I am, and you can't have any compassion for what it's like to be a grieving mother right now, then, that's not the kind of friendship I want. I don't have energy for it. It's harsh, but it's also true. It's just true.
It's true. One of the things, Stephen's name came up a couple of times, but Stephen would say stuff like, if somebody's like 2 months after the death of your beloved, if somebody's like having a conversation with you about like, well, don't you think you should be moving along, or don't, it's been 2 months, that's an indication of how little capacity they have to deal with their own pain. So your pain touches, everybody that's in contact with a grieving person. I feel if it touches their own grief,
Yeah.
whether that grief is acknowledged or unattended grief. And for some people, that's just such a frightening thing. Like I
Right.
remember an ex saying to me, I just, my father's been dead for 3 months and my mother's still like, it's like it just happened yesterday. I said they were together for 60 years. It was just yesterday for them. Like, that's about you being unable to grieve his loss, not about your mom. And bless his heart, he had the capacity to stop for a minute and think about it. He goes, yeah, I don't want to be feeling like that every day. And I was like, right. But like, how does that like honor your father's life or his legacy or like your mother's relationship with him? Like, this isn't about you. It's about your mom right now. And
Exactly.
your role, if your deal is to shove it all down and just smoke some more pot or drink some more beer, you know, that's why you're my ex. But also just think about other people move through this differently. He thanked me for that many years later, not like right then, but and it really sort of rang true that that's the capacity of the person who's saying those kinds of things. It's not a reflection on your ability to do grief correctly or however you want it
Exactly.
to.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of it's the discomfort, being willing to sit with somebody in your own discomfort and
Mm-hmm.
their discomfort
Yep.
and just be okay with it.
And just
And
acknowledge that.
just acknowledge it. Like it's okay to say, I'm just going to be really honest. This is really freaking uncomfortable, but I am here for you. I am
Mm.
here with you. I will sit by your side.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I do. I work with a group of people. We go into prisons and train people who are incarcerated around how to be grief companions, how to show up for end of life, death, dying, loss, and grief, palliative care, and memory care, because they're dealing now with, like, prisons are like the worst kind of skilled nursing facilities you've ever imagined in your life. So they're helping their peers as they're getting to the end of their life, and being able to find a place that's safe in a prison to be able to grieve some of those losses. They had 6 guys die last week on the hospice unit, and
Wow.
Most hospice volunteers would have that loss and then take some time off to process the loss. And plus, they're strangers. These are guys, some of them they've been living with for 20 or 30 years. So, like, trying to be not in that kind of environment, like, we have a lot of options. I've realized going to prisons a lot. We have so many options, and we can take advantage of those or not. But most of us have a quiet place where we could go to just sit and cry if we wanted to, and or take a walk in something that's, outside,
Right.
and just to be with that kind of pain and acknowledge it. There's one other question that I'm going to come back to, Nicholas. There's a question here about somebody saying that they don't know what to do, or what to say to people who don't want to or are unable to not acknowledge their grief. I try to meet them, but it's difficult at times to get a sense of kind of where they actually are.
I think that's really true. If
Yep.
people are really in denial about their grief, you really can't convince them that they have it. You can't, that's your agenda, not theirs. At the same time, I think it's really powerful to still say, I'd love to take a walk, just being present. It doesn't have to be a question about grief, but I think that the most powerful question for me has been, how is your grief today? Because
Yes.
it's different every single day. It's different hour to hour. It's different so many times. So when somebody asks me, how's my grief today? It feels like an invitation that is truly being asked. It's just not a platitude of like, like when somebody asks you how you're doing in the first like 6 months of the loss of your loved one, you're like, what do you think? How do you think I am? Like, that doesn't help. But to ask how your grief is, it's like, I can say like, huh, let me think about that. How am I? I feel a little lost but I haven't been crying as much today. I made a mandala, I felt better.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank
It
you.
just allows me to slow down.
That's right. I mean, because this is something that's just, even despite 20, 30 years of sort of Buddhist friends and practice and stuff, like, this world we live in goes so fast, and to be able to slow down enough to be able to be responsive to things that are happening instead of just constantly reactive, reactive, reactive. Being present to our own life and our own grief and what we can do and what we can't do, and acknowledging that what we can't do isn't a failure on our part, but it's just that we live in an environment that doesn't seem to acknowledge anything except go, 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 get, go. So an environment of people that have never been able to grieve properly or acknowledge the losses that they've had. So thank you for this conversation, Luna. And Nicholas, I'm going to bring you down here into the ad spotlight area. And if you want to go ahead and ask your question, please do.
Yes, this is not so much of a question, but perhaps there's a question in it. I recently experienced a situation where somebody was trying to put somebody down, by trying to insinuate that their grief was not worth it. And that was so painful. I tried to prevent that, because I knew what the person was going to say. So I said, please don't say that. I beg you not to say it. And the person went ahead to the person grieving and basically say, you didn't grieve that way for such and such. So it was comparing, I don't know if I'm making myself clear. This person was grieving for a creature, and this other person came in and said, you didn't grieve that way when this person died, this other person died. And I just tried to prevent it, and I couldn't do it. It was,
Mm.
I didn't know what to say. I don't know if you have any words of wisdom or anything.
I think what we tend to hold back from is, how does it impact you? How does it hurt your heart to hear someone compare grief and I think this is a common thing where it's like, well, how could you grieve, that loss of your dog is that, how could you grieve that to the same intensity as someone who lost a child, as someone, but it is your child, and who am I to say what that loss feels like to you? It's your every minute companion, and you lose that, or you lose a breast, or you lose, um, a home and a fire. I think there's so many things we just don't even have the curiosity to invite, like, what is it that this experience is bringing you? And that I think is the most, I mean, we have, I think it's so painful when anybody judges another person's way of grieving. And the saddest part for me is that we just don't get curious. Tell me what it's like for you right now. We just heard from somebody who lost their son in 1993. What's it like today for you having lost your son in 1993? And obviously it's still such a thing. It doesn't go away. But I'd like to know, how has it shifted? What's true now? What is the harvest of that loss now? And we have no idea what what they lost meant to them without asking. So yeah, yeah. And I just think it's super painful when we witness that harm being done of judging another person's grieving process.
And also this idea that somehow like it's a contest, like grief is not a contest.
Mm-mm.
You are the only person, like you are the only person that can tell your story. You are also the only person that understands what that loss meant to you. So this judging or this contrasting or comparing my grief to your grief, or this loss to that loss, and which was the most important, like when did this become some kind of a one-upsmanship of who's doing a better job at this? Like that's also a curious question to me. Like how did we get there instead of just acknowledging how painful this experience is for that person in this moment? Yeah, thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you.
Luna, there's something here. I wonder if you might want to address this. This is from somebody that's Stephen Bella saying the platitudes offered by people have left me feeling stuck between a rock and a hard place. I know they're good intentions, yet their offerings have often made me feel even more isolated and at times angry. When I've attempted to talk to those who are close to me about how I wish they could respond, they've become defensive.
Yeah, it's a hard one. And again, I think it's one of those situations where you start to discover who are the people that can go forward with you on this path and who can't. And I think one of the best ways to approach that is, are you willing to have a conversation you know, about this? Are you willing to talk with me about it and learn from me about what works for me? And, you know, and accept the fact that some people will not be willing to do that or able to. Some
Yes.
people just get defensive rather. I had a friend who said, when I wrote something about happy birthday, and she's like, well, at least we're saying happy birthday. And I was like, yeah, but why can't you take the feedback I'm giving you, which is that it hurts to be told to have a happy birthday 4 months after you lose your only child? Like, could you take that in?
Right.
That would be lovely. Could you say, wow, I don't know what else to say, but I'm happy to learn, and thank you for teaching me.
Yeah.
Thank you for teaching me. I mean, geez, that's what I hope for in friends.
Yes. Yeah.
And I really hope that somebody will tell me if I say something that's insensitive or not helpful, like, please tell me. I mean, you don't have to, do it in a mean way, but to do it in a way that's with compassion and says, Luna, when you said that, it didn't really feel good. Yeah, like I had a guy I'm new in this community, and I sat down at the table and somebody asked me about Hunter, and I said a few things about him, and somebody at the table said, could we just not talk about that? I was just like, what? Are you serious? It really took me. And I just was like, oh, okay. You're uncomfortable with me talking about the death of my son. I get that. But yeah. So,
You get up and
it's a
leave
question,
then.
but it's new. Like this is a new person. I don't even know them yet. I just met them. So it was just it's like, at what stage of a relationship is it going to be a comfortable place for me to say, you know, that hurt.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could put yourself in my shoes and understand a little bit about what that would feel like, especially as somebody new coming into a community. So yeah, I mean, I think I do see my role as one of educating people. I'm not one to just kind of sit back and say, well, yeah, I think you mean well. Um, I think a lot of us mean well, but we can do better. And I'm here. I think that's why I think of myself. I borrowed the term grief activist from Siobhan, actually, but I love the idea of like activism around how do we do this better? How do we become more compassionate? How do we become more curious and understanding and stop making assumptions about what people want or need or feel? Like, woof, there's so much here.
Thank you. Somebody's right. Oh, Monica, hello, Monica, is recommending the book "Don't Ask for the Dead Man's Golf Clubs: What to Do and Say and What Not to When a Friend Loses a Loved One."
Ask for the dead man.
That sounds like
Great
an
title.
excellent title. Yeah, I'm very curious about that book. I'll include that on our resource. So Carol's asking, what was the most helpful from a friend or family member in stepping into your grief with you? What was most helpful?
That's a great question. Um, the most helpful thing was people who just, my dog needs to come up. Come on, buddy. Hojo! He's a very serious emotional support animal, so he's feeling it. The most helpful thing was people who just showed up and brought thoughtful little gifts, things that were permanent that didn't die. You know, like I had somebody who brought me a beautiful rose that was called Hunter, but that was a hunter rose. Just really thoughtful. Wind chimes with his name on it, or that just thoughtful gifts, but also just bringing food, saying, you know, not asking, you know, just like, I'm going to come over on Friday night and I'm bringing you dinner and I don't need to stay, but I'm just letting you know I'm going to come, I'm going to drop things off. And then in that little dinner packet of things was like just sweet little thoughtful gifts and a card. And that kind of thing is just so meaningful. And a couple friends like that hasn't stopped. Like there's 4 years later, they still know that these things are important. This year, the same friend went to Hunter's grave because I left Portland and we moved cross country, and she went to his grave on his 4th yard site. And she and my friend spent 2 hours just there, being there and sending us pictures and telling us what was happening. And it was just such a meaningful thing. Like it meant something to them to be there for us in that way because we couldn't be there.
That's a beautiful friend. Really.
Yeah.
Somebody else just posted that this has been so meaningful. They're looking forward to the email. Great gathering, so authentic and real. Looking forward to the email with many grieving tools and tips with gratitude. Yeah, thank you, Shauna Marie. And Deborah sharing, a friend saying, "You're so strong. If I had lost my child, I'd be a total wreck." And I thought, like, you love your child more than I love mine. Like, I didn't say it at the time, but it was so hopeful. And both of us are therapists.
Well, you know, the other thing I'm just going to comment on, you know, so many people will say, I can't imagine. And I'm just going to tell you that you said that. So you just imagined it. It's not a helpful thing to say, I can't imagine.
Yes.
It's helpful to say, I'm imagining the devastation. I'm imagining just the absence, the hole in your heart. I'm imagining, you know, I want to know more, you know, but it's, you know, it scares people who have children to talk to a mom who's lost a child. It scares people who have a spouse to think about losing a spouse, you know, so it's like it's a really delicate balance, I think, to be able to acknowledge like, oh, this brings up fear for me about my own people. And I don't want that to get in the way of stepping in and knowing about your experience. I still want to be here for you. Yeah.
I'm looking at the time. It's 11:26, so we have 4 more minutes. And I'm just curious if there's anybody out there that's been sitting the whole time thinking, I want to ask a question, I want to ask a question. Jay, I saw your question in there kind of around chronic loss, I'm going to move back. I'm just wondering if you want to ask that question. It's kind of grief related to chronic like illness and loss around chronic illness. And if you would like to, you've unmuted your, it looks like you're
Yes.
not. Okay, why don't you go ahead? I can't find you because you don't have your camera on.
Yes.
Why don't you
Okay.
go ahead?
Thank you so much for that. Yeah. So people who are sufferers of trauma or chronic illness, and they really don't know what the future holds, or a diagnosis, and they don't know if it seems to be a severance from the old version of themselves that was creative and vivacious and outgoing, and your personality can often shift, especially with neurological trauma and things that create brain fog, like mold, Lyme, things like this.
Oh,
So
yeah.
how do you, because I envision myself making an alter to the old version of myself, but I still see her coming through on occasion. So I don't want to kill her off and mourn her, but there's a new version of myself being born. But I do feel like if I get healthy enough or well enough, there will be a day where she'll be evolved, but she'll be back again. She'll be here again. But I don't know for sure. I don't know if that part of me will eventually pass on before I get better, if I ever get better.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful, yeah, I get that. And what I would say is, I mean, a grieving person for a loss of a child could say the same thing. Like that person I was still shines through, but I'm becoming, I'm different. So really, what if you just created an altar to the transformation that you're undergoing, and acknowledging, like, there's a couple really beautiful rituals for letting go of the things that you want to let go of that prior self, and the things you're inviting in as a new self, a self that has agency and health um and passion that are hard to have when you have chronic illnesses. I know it's just really the friend that I was just mentioning, who's been so incredibly present, has been dealing with amazing, incredible chronic illnesses, and just that's part of her compassion. She understands that loss. And so I think honoring the loss doesn't mean that you're honoring that the person you were is entirely dead. No, that person is just changing, and allowing her to change, and welcoming that I really think that the metaphor of, the caterpillar turning into a butterfly is a great one, because one of the things I read when I was writing a poem about it was that every single cell in that caterpillar is in the butterfly. It's like, and so think of it that way. Think of it as every single thing I have been, now that I'm in the mush of this chronic illness, is helping me become that next piece that will emerge with wings. And in some way, you will emerge with wings. It's just you don't know how yet.
I have a question.
1 second.
Deborah,
One,
can I ask?
we're going to hold on a second because we're not done with it. Jamie, are you
Yeah,
good?
I mean, I guess for me is when parasites, bacteria, fungus, organisms are taking over your body and brain, it's like I guess it's hard for me to discern that it's still me, because I don't feel like me anymore. So I would almost rather go back to the previous version of myself, or manifest a newer, better version of that, because this version is not my personality, and this is 90% of the time not me. So it's very hard for my brain to understand which part of myself to mourn, when the things that are taking over my body or have been trying to take over my body aren't me.
Yeah, I get you. I will say that Siobhan is extremely experienced with working with people with chronic illness. So if that calls to you, even her online pilgrimages, there's always people in there that are dealing with chronic illness. So I encourage you to check that out.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Luna. Luna, we are at 11:31. I want to honor the time because I know some people have to go. And Deborah has her hand up. So we could either end this now formally and say goodbye, turn off the recording, or if you have time, maybe for 5 minutes to.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Deborah.
Okay, Deborah, why don't we go ahead? I'm going to bring you down here. And why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and
I think I did.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good.
This is for Luna. Luna, it's interesting. You have a lot of rules about what people should say and what they shouldn't say. And of course, you know that people say things that people have always said, and they don't mean any harm. You know, they just maybe don't know what to say, as you said. Um, what if, like, I came into you and said, "What would you like me to say today? What would you like to hear from me today?"
I would say that it would depend on the energy that you come in with. If you come in with curiosity, instead of it sounds, I'll be honest, it sounds a bit defensive, what you just said.
Really?
It's yeah, because what you just said before that was that I have a lot of rules, but I don't feel like I'm saying I have a lot of rules. What I'm saying is platitudes or things that just feel like unconscious or cultural norms don't feel good and don't feel personal. But having somebody come in and say, or sit with me and say, "How's your heart today, Luna? Can I just sit with you?"
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a beautiful, vulnerable approach.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
So does the people that come in and say platitudes, do you then respond with, "Please don't say that," or "That hurts me," or I don't know what you would say, but whatever
It
you would
depends.
say.
No, I don't typically bring it up unless it depends on where I am. If I'm in a situation that's a social gathering and there's people I barely know, no, I'm not likely to say anything. But if it's
Uh-huh.
people that I know well and they continue to say it, then I might be like, this isn't working for me. I'm willing if just wondering if you're willing to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
thank
welcome.
you,
Thanks for
Deborah.
asking.
Yeah. Okay, let's do this. So I'm going to end the formal part of our meeting today, Luna. I just want to thank you so much. The feedback and the chat has been really beautiful. I think it was really wonderful to have a conversation that was both vulnerable and also your strength just shines through. And I feel like, it's sort of like this vision I have of you on this very wobbly bicycle, and then the training wheels are like the creativity, the different tools that you could just reach out and be like, today, this resonates with me today. This resonates with me, and just this encouragement for all of us to slow down in these times of grief. Like in writing, when we hit like an emotional point, Anne will always say you need to slow that down, and that's because when we live that experience, we need to slow it down too, and really
Exactly.
to listen to what our heart and our body need in times of grief. And just if there's anything else that you'd like to say before I turn off the recording, I do want to just thank again people who were able to make a donation, and thank you so much for your support. And I know not everybody's in this position, but thank you for the support. It really goes a long way in keeping these kinds of opportunities free and available for as many people as possible. And so
Thank you
thank
all
you
for
for the
being here
Elizabeth
so
Kübler-Ross
much.
Foundation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really
Okay,
appreciate you
I'm
being
going to
here.
turn off the formal part of this recording now. I'd ask for people not to unmute themselves until it tells you that we're finished. Whoops. Thank you so much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you. The next one we're going to be doing will be in the middle of November, around the 19th, I believe, on a Thursday, with Lois Kelly, also from the Unmute class. And she's just written a book about navigating a death that was very slow. It took 12 years. So how do you grieve something that takes that amount of time and that kind of energy over 12 years? And Lois is going to talk about some of the creative ways that she's found to navigate that loss. So you'll be getting some email about that. Thank you so much. And I'm turning off the recording now.